Hello, I'm Mr. Eliason, and welcome to A-Push. Today we're going to discuss the breakdown of political unity and the recreation of political parties in what's known as the end of the era of good feelings. So, let's dive in and talk about the things that broke down this period of supposed political unity. So, these are our objectives for today. Take a moment to observe and take them in, and then we'll jump into our narrative. The basic debate that, quite honestly, if you've been following along, has divided the different regions of the country for this entire unit is the idea of Commonwealth society. The question whether the government has some obligation to attempt to pass reforms and improvements to improve the lives of everyone. Whose responsibility is it to create mills for the use of grinding grain? Whose responsibility is it to create infrastructure to connect the country together, roads, canals, things like that? Should it only be the people who use these improvements, or is there some general benefit to all of society by creating these internal improvements? This is the debate which is going to continue to divide the country throughout the rest of this unit and is going to lead to the recreation of political parties after the whole controversy over the election of 1824. Henry Clay was the strongest advocate for this whole Commonwealth society with his quote-unquote American system. He laid out the American system in a 3-day-long speech in the House of Representatives. Here's just a short excerpt of it, but it's pretty straightforward. The truth is that the domestic industry nourishing foreign trade and foreign commerce in turn nourishes the domestic industry. Nowhere more in New York is the combination of most principles so completely developed. In the progress of my argument, I will consider the effect upon the price of commodities produced by the American system and show that the very reverse of the predictions of its foes in 1824 has actually happened. So, Henry Clay's American system is the use of a national bank in order to stimulate and grow and regulate the U.S. economy, a protective tariff to protect American industry, and then the money from that protective tariff being used to build infrastructure to connect the various regions of the country together and further reinforce this whole buildup of domestic manufacturing. So, in general, the three regions of the country felt very differently about this. The West was in favor, both because they would get access to more finished products through these internal improvements, and because they would benefit greatly from being more integrated into the national economy. The North, for the most part, was supportive of it, although tariffs did lead to higher prices for some. For Northerners being involved in an industry, they could develop their domestic industry and would have new markets in the West. Whereas the South, represented again by our friend John C. Calhoun, is very against this, using very harsh language like humbug to describe it. The South did not see a benefit in any of these because they did not get most of the infrastructure, and they simply had to pay higher prices from either northern manufacturers or European goods which would be affected by the tariff. So again, we see our three regions, the North and West, united in order to push this stuff through against the will of the southern states. The other issue that divided the country, quite literally, was the Missouri Compromise. With the cotton boom pushing slavery westward, there was a real question about Missouri's statehood. There had been a balance between the free and slave states prior to the Missouri Compromise. Missouri was prepared to come into the Union, and so in order to maintain that balance, Missouri came in as a slave state, and Maine was carved out of Massachusetts to come in as a free state, and they created a line here, the 3630 line, which would establish that most of the Louisiana Territory would be closed to slavery, whereas the area below the line would be open to further expansion of slavery. Hopefully anyone looking at this can see that compromise is not going to hold over the long term and is going to lead to increasing pressure to get more land south of the 3630 line, but that's a conversation for another lesson and another unit. Thomas Jefferson clearly saw the problem with this. You should probably take a moment to read his famous letter, but the highlights of it, of course, are, quote, "The momentous question, like a fire bell in the night, awakened and filled me with terror. I considered it at once to be the death knell of the Union. I think, but as it is, we have the wolf by the ear, and we can neither hold him nor safely let him go. Justice is in one scale, and self-preservation in another." All of this, the increased expansion of slavery, and, of course, the increasing controversy over slavery is going to lead to a significant growth in abolitionist movements and in general black cultural movements. Most famously, Richard Allen established the African Methodist Episcopal Church, a black church originally in Philadelphia, but that would quickly spread across the country. For many black communities, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, or the AME Church, was able to form connections between their communities and establish their shared interests, organize, pressure campaigns, spread news, and provide support for black people in these various communities. And so this was an important piece of infrastructure that would later become essential to the movement to get rid of slavery. And we see a number of slave uprisings. We had talked previously about the New Orleans slave revolt. And we're also going to see we talked about Haiti previously. And people like Frederick Douglass are going to run away and escape slavery and then live the rest of their lives advocating strongly against it. Oftentimes, for escaped slaves like Frederick Douglass, black churches became sort of a refuge and a network that would eventually evolve into a more comprehensive underground railroad system. But for now, it's simply a way for black people to communicate and support each other. The election of 1824 was kind of a hot mess. Whereas the election of 1820, we had only one candidate, James Monroe, running unopposed. He's not going to run anymore because of the tradition of 2 terms. And so we're going to have 4 separate candidates, each representing a separate part of the country. We have John Quincy Adams here representing the North. We have William Crawford representing the South. We have Andrew Jackson representing the West and sort of the South. And we have Henry Clay representing the North and also sort of the South. This election was the one who gave us the phrase running for office from this political cartoon, A Foot Race, where we see the candidates literally running. And the end result of this election is a hot mess. As you can see, there are no political parties, and so there is some regional affiliation here, but the vote is split pretty evenly 4 ways. And so, as we talked about from in class previously, if there is no clear majority, the top 3 vote getters in the Electoral College are going to be tossed into the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives is going to determine the victor. So, judging by this, anyone would assume, well, clearly, the will of the voters is Andrew Jackson, and so he should probably become president of the United States. But it's also a hard case to make, considering he got 38% of the electoral vote, and is 38% a broad enough mandate for the House of Representatives to elevate someone? It turns out it isn't, and in the House of Representatives, John Quincy Adams was elected president. And so as you look between these two maps, what becomes clear is that the states that voted for Henry Clay have now flipped to vote for John Quincy Adams. And coincidentally, when John Quincy Adams decided to put together his cabinet, he decided to make Henry Clay his Secretary of State. This did not go over well from the Jackson supporters. Quote, "The friends of Clay have hinted that they, like the Swiss, would fight for whoever would pay best. Overtures were said to have been made by the friends of Adams to the friends of Clay, offering him the appointment of Secretary of State for his aid to elect Adams." There's no proof that this actually happened, that there was actually an alliance or some sort of agreement between the two. In general, Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams were politically aligned, and so it made sense for Henry Clay to support John Adams, even without some sort of clandestine agreement. And it made sense for Adams to appoint Clay his Secretary of State, because again, they are politically aligned, supporting the American system. But for the Jackson supporters, this becomes known as the corrupt bargain, where political offices are being exchanged for votes in dark rooms. To him, it reeks of corruption, and Jackson and his supporters set out to destroy Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams and block as much of their agenda as possible, which is going to make Adams' presidency a kind of unfortunate one for him. So for John Quincy Adams, despite his pretty illustrious political career at this point, negotiating an end to the War of 1812, authoring the Monroe Doctrine, helping to push through a lot of Henry Clay's American system during James Monroe's presidency, despite all of that, most of his time as president was marred by political infighting and obstructionism from the Jacksonian factions, and all we really got is a really high protective tariff that was pushed to the level that it was, mostly by enemies of John Quincy Adams, as an attempt to humiliate him. This became known, especially in the South, as the Tariff of Abominations, and is going to become one of the flashpoints for one of our political controversies later in this unit. John C. Calhoun is going to strongly protest the tariff, Ironically, of course, at this point, John C. Calhoun is John Adams' vice president, or his Secretary of State. And so we're going to see some significant pushback against John C. Calhoun, or some significant pushback from within his administration against John Quincy Adams. So obviously the North is somewhat split on the tariff. The West, who's getting the money for internal improvements, generally supports it, and the South, strongly opposed to it. So here we see an anti-tariff political cartoon where the North is getting fat, whereas the South apparently, one, can't spell the word toilet, and secondarily is upset about tariffs and taxes and is very skinny because of a lack of food because of the tariff? I'm pretty sure it's the tariff. So here we go. Here's John C. Calhoun writing to James Monroe, talking about the destruction of the political party, the political establishment. And so what we're going to start to see is an exodus of Southern and Jackson-aligned Western Republicans from the Republican Party to form this new political party that we're going to be talking about next time, this party called the Democrats. And so here's your Jackson. Jackson and Calhoun are going to be allied together in a new Western-Southern alliance in an attempt to break the Western-Northern alliance that has dominated American politics since the aftermath of the War of 1812. This political realignment between the forces of Jackson and the forces of John C. Calhoun is going to realign American politics, creating a new Western-Southern alliance, especially when they bring in Martin Van Buren, who was a very skilled political operator from New York. The Swell Dutchman, or the Little Magician, as he was known, was the child of Dutch immigrants. He created a political machine called the Albany Regency in order to contain and to get people elected in New York State. He used a system of patronage, giving offices to political supporters to bring people in line, and through this was able to direct politics and control the New York State legislature. The Democratic Party is going to take a lot of these principles and use them to create the first real national unified political party, using party discipline and patronage to keep members in line and to build a larger political alliance. So here we see Jackson and Martin Van Buren helping to create this new national political party. They're going to use a combination of newspapers in order to bring people in there. They're going to create platforms, basically a series of principles that everyone in the party should adhere to in order to make it clear to voters what the party stands for. They're going to be running candidates on shared ballots, and they're going to be, so here's a shared ballot, basically tying down ballot candidates to the presidential candidate, and they're going to use a position called the party whip to keep people in line. The party whip makes sure that their various members vote in the ways in which you want by offering a series of cabinet positions or positions on committees or political patronage jobs to people in exchange for making sure that they're going to vote in that specific particular way. And so they create a cohesive voting bloc in order to, during this time period, mostly block everything that John Quincy Adams is going to try to do. The other thing that we're going to see as part of the second party system is the rise of celebrity. This is most embodied by the hero of New Orleans, Old Hickory, Andrew Jackson, whose military exploits had made him a celebrity in most of the country, and the eventual candidacy of William Henry Harrison, who we remember as the hero of both the Battle of Tippecanoe and the Battle of the Thames, where Tecumseh was killed. So all of these components are going to remake American politics and are going to continue to be an important facet of American politics up until this day. So here are our objectives for today. Hopefully you can answer them in some detail, and thank you for listening.